I never believed in ghost stories. I always thought those tales were just for kids or people looking for attention. But something happened to me a few years ago at a motel off a desolate stretch of highway in New Mexico that changed everything. I still can't shake the feeling that something was watching me the entire time I was there. It started innocently enough. I was driving cross-country, just me and my old pickup truck. I was tired, running low on gas, and couldn't see any signs of civilization for miles. It was getting late and I needed to stop somewhere. That's when I saw the neon sign flickering in the distance, Pinecrest Motel, vacancies. The place looked run down, the kind of spot you wouldn't think twice about driving past. But after hours of nothing but barren land, it looked like a beacon of hope. I pulled into the gravel parking lot, the tires crunching under the weight of my truck. As I got out, I felt the cold desert air bite at my skin and the hairs on the back of my neck prickled. The place seemed too quiet, like no one had been there for years. The motel was 2 stories, with peeling paint on the walls and a flickering light by the front door. I walked up to the office and knocked. A woman appeared in the doorway, tall, with wild, graying hair and eyes that seemed a little too wide. She didn't smile, didn't greet me, just stared. I asked for a room. She didn't say much, just handed me a rusty key with a metal tag that read Room 13 in chipped paint. "Stay inside after dark," she said, her voice strangely flat. I wasn't in the mood to ask why. I just wanted to sleep. I grabbed the key and headed up to the room, the door creaking as I opened it. The room was small, but it was fine: bed, TV, a table. I locked the door, threw my bags on the bed, and sat down. But something about the room felt wrong. It was like the air was thick, as though I wasn't alone. I brushed it off as fatigue. I turned on the TV, but the signal was static-filled, only showing blurry images of what looked like old news broadcasts. That's when I heard it, a soft tapping on the window. I froze. It was quiet, barely audible, but unmistakable. I stood up and walked cautiously to the window, peeking through the blinds. Outside, there was nothing, just darkness. I thought I might be imagining it, but then the tapping came again, louder this time. My heart raced. I didn't know what to do. I stared out into the night for what felt like hours, but saw nothing. Then I heard a voice. Clear. Cold. Don't go outside after dark. I whirled around. The voice had come from the corner of the room, but there was no one there. I stood there, frozen, staring at the empty corner of the room. My pulse was pounding in my ears and my mouth was dry. I wanted to call out to ask who was there, but the words just wouldn't come. I felt like I was being watched, but from where? I slowly backed up, my feet heavy on the carpet, eyes darting from one corner of the room to the next. The tapping on the window had stopped, but now the silence was suffocating. I moved toward the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. But before I could open it, I heard the sound again. This time, it wasn't coming from the window, it was coming from the hallway. A slow, rhythmic creaking, like someone was walking across the old wooden floorboards. I stood perfectly still, straining to hear. The creaking grew louder, closer. It was unmistakable now. Someone or something was definitely walking down the hall. But why? I hadn't seen anyone when I first arrived. The woman at the front desk had given me the key, but she hadn't mentioned anyone else staying there. I was about to make a run for it when the light in the room flickered, then went out completely. Darkness swallowed the room, leaving me with nothing but the sound of my ragged breathing. My heart was hammering in my chest. I fumbled for my phone, praying it wasn't dead. But when I turned on the flashlight, the weak beam barely cut through the blackness. I grabbed the handle of the door again, this time twisting it harder. It wouldn't budge. I cursed under my breath, trying to force it open, but the damn thing was stuck. I started to pound on it with my fist, shouting for help, but my voice sounded muffled, as if the walls themselves were pressing in on me. That's when I heard it again, the voice. This time it was clearer, sharper, and it was coming from inside the room. "Don't let them in." I whipped around, the light of my phone dancing across the room, but there was nothing there. Nothing but the walls that felt like they were closing in. Suddenly, the door to the room burst open. My heart leapt into my throat. I spun around, expecting someone to be standing there, but it was just the hallway, empty. I rushed to the doorway, the faintest glimmer of light coming from the end of the hall, and there, standing at the far end, barely visible, was a figure. It was a man, tall and thin, dressed in a tattered coat. His face was obscured, shadowed under the dim glow of the overhead light, but I could feel his presence. His eyes, dark, hollow, seemed to pierce right through me. I could hardly breathe as I backed away from the door, but before I could slam it shut, the man stepped forward. The light flickered again, and for a split second I saw his face, gray, decayed, like something pulled from the grave. "Don't let them in," the voice repeated, but this time it wasn't just one voice. It was dozens, whispering all around me, coming from every corner of the room. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But my body wouldn't move. Then I heard the soft sound of footsteps approaching from behind me. I wasn't alone anymore. I spun around, my heart nearly jumping out of my chest, but there was nothing there. The room was still. The door was open, and the flickering light from the hallway cast long, eerie shadows into the room. I could hear my breath quick, shallow, loud in the silence, but there was no sound of footsteps anymore. For a moment, I thought I was losing it. Maybe the fatigue from my long drive, the isolation, and the strange atmosphere of the motel had all been too much. I leaned against the wall, trying to steady myself, but just as I did, I felt something cold brush against the back of my neck. My body stiffened. I didn't dare turn around. I was about to open my mouth and call out when a soft voice whispered in my ear, "Run." I whirled around, but the room was still empty. No one. Nothing. The temperature had dropped so suddenly that I could see my breath in the air. The room felt like it was alive now, as if the walls were pulsing with something unseen, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being hunted. I bolted for the door, but as soon as I reached it, the light in the hallway flickered and went out, plunging everything into complete darkness. I froze, my hand on the knob hard hammering. I couldn't see a thing. Then a sharp knocking sounded, soft at first, like a distant echo. Knock. 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 It was coming from the door. The knock wasn't from the outside. It was coming from inside the room. I swung around, and there, standing in the corner by the window, was the man from the hallway. His figure was still barely visible, but this time I could see his hands, long, bony fingers, gripping the edges of the window as if he was trying to climb through. I backed away slowly, my legs shaking. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body wouldn't respond. Then I heard the woman's voice again, the one who had given me the room key. It was distorted now, like she was speaking through a broken radio. "You're not supposed to be here," she said, her voice echoing from all directions. "You should have listened. Now it's too late." I turned toward the door. I had to get out, I had to escape. But as I reached for the handle, something grabbed my wrist. Cold fingers, too cold, wrapped around my arm, pulling me back. I spun around, but there was no one there. I could feel the pressure on my wrist intensify. The grip tightened until it hurt. I fought against it, tugging and struggling, but the unseen force was too strong. I glanced at the door again. The figure in the corner moved closer. I could hear his raspy breathing now, and I could feel the presence of something else, something much darker, something that wanted me to stay. In desperation, I wrenched my arm free and ran for the window. I yanked it open, but as I stepped forward, I saw the reflection in the glass. There was someone standing right behind me. I didn't dare turn around. With a scream, I scrambled out of the window, falling onto the ground below. My legs gave out, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I ran. And I didn't stop running until I was miles away. But even now, every time I close my eyes, I can hear that whisper. I can feel the cold fingers on my wrist. And I know one thing for certain, I never should have stayed at the Pinecrest Motel. I didn't stop for hours. I drove with a kind of frantic energy, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My truck was still running low on gas, but I didn't care. I passed a few towns, but nothing felt real. It was as if I had stepped out of the world entirely into some kind of nightmare that stretched on and on without an end. I kept telling myself I was just imagining things. Maybe it was all the isolation, the strange vibe of the motel. Maybe it was the exhaustion or even the cold desert air that was playing tricks on my mind. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that man, his hollow eyes, that decayed, twisted face. As I passed a gas station, I pulled over, hoping to gather my thoughts. The station was old, just like everything else out here, but I wasn't looking for anything except a few moments of calm. I went inside to pay for gas, and that's when I saw her. The woman from the motel. She was standing in the corner of the station, her eyes locked on mine the moment I stepped in. Her wild, graying hair looked even more unkempt now, and her gaze, it was like she knew me, like she had been watching me for years. I felt a chill run down my spine. I turned quickly to leave, but she spoke before I could reach the door. "You shouldn't have left," she said softly, her voice strangely calm. "They'll find you." I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I rushed out of the station, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. I drove faster this time, pushing the truck harder than I should have. The road stretched out before me, endless and empty, but I could feel it. I could feel them. Something was following me. I didn't know what it was or how, but it was there, just out of sight, just beyond my reach. I couldn't shake the feeling. That night, I decided to pull over. It was getting late, and my eyes were burning from exhaustion. I found a little rest area just off the highway and parked. I locked the doors, not even caring that it was cold outside. I just wanted to sleep, to put the last few hours behind me. But sleep wouldn't come. Instead, I kept hearing the same sound. The faint tapping. At first, I thought I was just being paranoid, but then it got louder. Closer. It was coming from the roof of my truck. I froze. I stared at the ceiling, trying to convince myself it was just an animal, a bird, anything but what I feared it could be. But the tapping didn't stop. It was deliberate, rhythmic, like someone walking slowly across the roof, their feet dragging just enough to send a chill down my spine. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it through the windows, but there was nothing but the darkness outside. No sign of movement. Then, suddenly, the tapping stopped. For a long time, there was nothing. Just silence. The kind of silence that makes you feel like you're being watched, like every corner, every shadow holds something lurking. I exhaled, trying to calm myself, telling myself it was just an animal, a figment of my overactive imagination. But then I heard it. A voice. Get out of the truck. It was whispering, cold and distant, but I knew it wasn't in my head. Without thinking, I turned the key in the ignition and sped off, heart racing, adrenaline pumping. I didn't care where I was going as long as I was getting away from there. I drove for miles, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror, terrified of what might be behind me. That night, I passed several more towns, but I didn't stop. Not for gas. Not for food. Not even to sleep. Couldn't risk it. The longer I stayed on the road, the more I felt like I was being drawn back. Like the motel's grip was tightening around me, pulling me towards something I wasn't ready to face. I don't know what happened to the Pinecrest Motel or the woman or the man I saw in the hall. I never stopped to look back. But I know this. If you ever find yourself driving through the desert and you see a flashing neon sign that says Pinecrest Motel vacancies, just keep driving. Don't stop. Don't even slow down. Because once you do, there's no going back. And if you're unlucky enough to check in, you may never check out. I didn't. And I know I'll never be free. It's been years since that night. But I still can't shake the feeling that something is watching me. Sometimes when I'm alone in the dark, I hear a tap on the window or the faintest whisper in the back of my mind. It's been almost unbearable, the fear, the paranoia. I thought leaving New Mexico would help, that I could forget about the Pinecrest Motel. But I was wrong. A few months ago, I tried to put it all behind me. I moved to a new city, found a new job, started over like nothing ever happened. It worked for a while, but then I started noticing things. Small things at first. A flickering light in my apartment, like the one from the motel. A cold breeze in the middle of summer. But the worst of it was when I started seeing faces in the crowd, familiar faces. Faces of people I hadn't seen in years. They were always just out of reach, always turning away as soon as I tried to focus on them. One night, I was walking home after work, my mind lost in thoughts about everything that had happened. I was near the end of my street when I felt it again, the unmistakable presence. That feeling of being followed. I quickened my pace, but the footsteps behind me matched my every step. I turned around, and my heart dropped into my stomach. There, standing across the street, was the same man I had seen in the motel hallway. His figure was blurry in the dim streetlight, but his eyes, those hollow, dark eyes, were unmistakable. He was staring directly at me. I didn't wait to see if he would move. I turned and ran, not even thinking about where I was going. I just needed to get away. I didn't stop until I was back in my apartment, locking every door, every window, like it would somehow make a difference. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't. I had already made the mistake of staying at the Pinecrest Motel, and I was paying for it. It didn't end there, though. A few nights later, I woke up to a sound in the middle of the night. Something tapping just like before. At first, I thought it was the wind or something else, but as it grew louder, more insistent, I knew better. I got out of bed, the cold sweat on my skin making the room feel even colder than usual. I looked out the window, but there was nothing there. No one. But the tapping, now it was coming from the walls. I backed away, feeling the air grow thick, almost suffocating. I couldn't think straight. I had to leave. I had to get out. I grabbed my keys and ran out of the apartment, driving aimlessly through the streets, until I found myself on a dark road in the middle of nowhere. I didn't know how I got there, but I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. I pulled over and sat in the car, trying to calm my racing thoughts. That's when I saw it. Off in the distance, through the trees, I saw a flickering neon sign. Pinecrest Motel vacancies. It was impossible. I had left that place. I hadn't even been near New Mexico in years. But there it was, like a bad memory pulling me back. A compulsion stronger than anything I could resist. I drove toward it. When I arrived, the motel looked the same. Dark, abandoned, as if time itself had forgotten it. The air was heavy, and I felt the cold seep into my bones. The door of the office was open, and I could hear the creaking of old wood inside. I walked in, knowing there was no going back. And that's when I saw her, the woman from the front desk. She was standing there, her wild hair even more unkempt, her eyes empty, almost sad. But the worst part was that she was smiling. "You came back," she said softly, as if it was inevitable. I didn't say anything. Couldn't. She handed me a key, room 13. I took it, and for the first time in years I understood. Once you check in, there's no checking out. I wish I could tell you that I'm writing this from a place of safety, that I found a way to escape, but I can't. Because I know deep down that this place is not just a motel. It's a trap. A trap for anyone who dares to wander too close. The man, the voices, the whispers, they'll follow you, no matter how far you go. So now I sit in this room, writing this, knowing that I'll never leave. And I'm just waiting for the tapping to start again. The tapping started again. It was faint at first, barely noticeable, but as the minutes passed, it grew louder. It was coming from the walls, no, not the walls, beneath the walls. It was like something was scratching, clawing, trying to get through. I lay on the bed, paralyzed, eyes wide open, unable to look away from the cracks in the walls where the sound was coming from. The room felt smaller, as if the space was closing in on me. It was too real, too alive. The door to room 13 suddenly creaked open, and I didn't even have to turn to know someone was standing there. I could feel it, the weight of their presence in the room. I stayed still, not daring to breathe too loudly. But then I heard a voice. Not from the door, not from the walls, but from behind me in the deepest corner of the room. "You're still here," it whispered, its tone cold, venomous. "You should have left." I could feel a shadow looming behind me, but every instinct told me not to look. If I turned around, I would see something that wasn't human. Something worse. The tapping became frantic, desperate, like it was begging to be heard. I couldn't take it any longer. I sat up, my heart racing, but as I moved, the room seemed to shift. The floor beneath me felt unstable, like it was tilting, and the walls started to pulse. I felt dizzy, like I was falling into something, into some other place. Then I heard something else, something worse than the tapping, the whispers, the breathing. A child's laugh. It was soft at first, barely a giggle, but it grew louder, more maniacal, as though a child was right next to me, grinning, savoring my fear. My skin crawled as I listened to the laugh, but the worst part was realizing it wasn't just one child, it was a group of them, dozens, hundreds. I could hear them all, their laughter echoing, coming from everywhere. I stood up, unable to stay still any longer, but when I reached for the door, it slammed shut on its own. I stumbled backward, trying to catch my breath, but before I could react, the lights flickered, then went out completely. The room was pitch black, and I could hear the children now giggling, whispering my name all around me. I tried to move, but I couldn't. It felt like the very air had thickened, wrapping around me, suffocating me. Then, in the darkness, I felt something cold brush my cheek, something soft, like the touch of a hand, but so cold it burned. I gasped, stumbling backward, but I couldn't escape it. My feet were frozen to the floor, and I could feel something dragging me toward the center of the room. The voice returned, closer this time, so close it was like it was inside my head. "You're ours now." I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The laughter, the whispers, the tapping, they were all around me now, suffocating me. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, everything stopped. The room went silent. The cold fingers were gone. The children's laughter faded into the background. I blinked, confused, trying to steady myself, but I couldn't. I was still trapped in this nightmare, in this place that wasn't a motel. Not anymore. It was a prison. The air was thick with an unnatural pressure, and I felt an overwhelming dread creeping over me. Then, in the dim light that returned, I saw it. The man from the hallway, the one with the hollow eyes, was standing by the bed, his figure finally fully visible. His decayed skin seemed to flicker, like it was barely holding together. But his eyes, those eyes, they were locked onto me, piercing through me like he could see into my soul. "You shouldn't have come back," he whispered, his voice a raspy, guttural sound. The room felt colder than ever, and I realized the truth too late. The motel had never been abandoned. The people who stayed here, we were never meant to leave. I was already one of them. And now room 13 has claimed me just as it had claimed so many others. I woke up, but it wasn't like any sleep I'd ever known. It was more like a haze, a dream that didn't end, a reality that didn't belong to me anymore. The room had changed. No longer a simple, rundown motel room, it had transformed into something darker. The walls seemed to close in on me with every breath I took, pressing me into the bed like a heavy weight, as if the room itself was alive and hungry. The man with hollow eyes was still there, but now he wasn't alone. Around him, in the shadows, were shapes, figures, twisted, blurred, like the distorted memories of everyone who had ever stayed here, everyone who had disappeared. "You're one of us now," the man rasped, stepping closer. His voice was no longer just his own. It was a chorus, hundreds of voices, overlapping and blending together. I couldn't escape it. It felt like they were inside my head, whispering, suffocating me with their cold words. "There's no leaving now." I tried to scream, but my mouth wouldn't open. I couldn't move, couldn't fight. It was as if my body no longer belonged to me. The figures around me shifted, their faces becoming clearer, more defined. There were men, women, children, some with eyes like mine, others with no eyes at all, just empty sockets. Their faces were twisted in agony, in horror, in a desperate plea for release. But there was no release. The figures closed in on me, pulling me toward the center of the room. I could feel the air around me growing colder and colder, and the tapping started again. This time louder, faster, like it was coming from everywhere, even from within me. "You'll never escape," the man with hollow eyes whispered one last time, as he reached out and touched my cheek with a cold, decaying hand. "We are the ones who stay. You belong to the motel now. You'll never leave. None of us ever do." And then, everything stopped. The laughter, the whispers, the tapping, the figures, the man. It all faded away, leaving only darkness. But I didn't feel relief. No, I felt the pull, the heavy weight of this place, the oppressive silence that lingered in the air. I understood now. I was part of the motel, part of its history, part of its curse. I had become one of the lost souls who wandered these rooms, unable to leave, forever trapped in this nightmare. The last thing I remember is the faint flicker of a neon sign through the darkness. Pinecrest Motel vacancies. I was just another vacancy now, another lost soul. And when the next traveler stumbles upon the motel, I will be here waiting for them to take the key, to check in, to become one of us. Because once you stay at the Pinecrest Motel, there's no leaving. There never was.